Kat, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to have you on my show.
I'm so excited. Thank you for having me. I love what you do.
Thank you so much. You've been so inspiring. And before we started recording, I told you that I've been watching you just killing it on social media. And I've seen your journey from when you were first on Janice's show a year ago and how much your life has changed. And we're going to get into that. First and foremost, I just want to thank you because you have been one of the people who have really, really inspired me to show up for myself. You don't understand the amount of notes that I took during your session. So it's just really coming around full circle. I'm just having like an Oprah moment right now that I have you on my show. So thank you.
Shush. Take that inspiration and let it be an example for you because I have someone that I'm the same way about. Like,
hmm
I'm like, she seems cool. And if
Yeah,
she can do it, I feel like I could do it too. There's lots of people who do a lot of amazing things, but when you find someone who share characteristics with or share the way you do life and business or the way you think about things, and you see them do it, it's such a path to pave. And I had someone the same way. So let it be known. Everything you want is happening for you. It's just on the other side of the hill.
absolutely. First, I'm going to have you introduce yourself for those who are meeting you for the first time. Let them know who is Kat.
Yeah, so my proper name is Catalina del Carmen Maldonado, but I go by Cat del Carmen, Catalina del Carmen, which are both my grandma's names. And I am a business coach for women of color. I help women of color, mostly coaches, but service based industries too. I help them feel good about sales and marketing because in our culture, for a lot of my clients at least, we have such deep beliefs about sales and marketing, and it's really embedded in like capitalistic views.
hmm
But I really help my clients feel safe in making a lot of money and going out there and serving their people and changing their mindset about what business can look like and like do it while living your life. I think it's really important to like build a business and do it sustainably and think long term so you can enjoy your life now. I have a busy life. I'm also a mom to two kids, husband, house, all these things. So it's really important for me to do that. Outside of that, I also have a podcast. So my podcast is called Latinas Booked Out. Formerly, it was Follow That Fear, which I know you might mention on the podcast. And that's where I mainly hang out, that and Instagram at Cat Del Carmen with a C.
Yeah, I love it. You're definitely out here killing it. And I want to get as many gems as I can from you as possible. Before we get into that, I always start off with every single guest talking about what life was like growing up. Paint the picture for my audience of how was little baby Cat? What was life look like for her?
Yeah, so I was raised by a single mother my entire life. So I never lived with my dad. And I was raised in San Francisco, California, before it became a tech bubble, back when there were like families walking around. That's where I grew up by my immigrant single mother. And I have one sister that I lived with, and then I have a half brother and a half sister on my dad's side. But for the most part of my life, it was me, my sister, and my mom. And I get a lot of characteristics from my mother. Because she was a single mom, I really only grew up seeing a very strong woman who always made the decisions for her, the house, always did what she wanted. So I am very stubborn and I know what I like and I just do what I want. And that kind of came from her. If I shared a little bit of my personality, I'd say I haven't changed much. I was rough and tough and broke a lot of bones.
hmm
And one thing for sure, I always knew I wanted more money and I
mm
always wanted and desired lots of success. Even in high school, I always told my friends when we would talk about what we wanted to be and when we wanted to have kids, I always told them, like little 14, 15-year-old Cat was like, I'm not going to have kids until I'm over 30 because I'm going to focus on my career
hmm
until I'm 30. So one of my clients is a money coach and she helps people retire early. And retiring does not seem fun to me. Why would I retire? What would I do? This is weird. I just love working and I love what I do. I work with women of color mainly and I help them make more money. And it's literally a dream come true.
That's a perfect segue because I know that wasn't the end goal for you. Before you got started and having your own business and coaching these women, you were doing something completely different. So, talk a little bit about that, and then you can go into how that transitioned to your coaching.
The last corporate job I had was at a Fortune 500 company. It was at Adobe Systems. I had a great job. I think I had just hit six figures in my salary. I worked in learning and development. And I was a business major, so I went to college, but I literally was really bad at school my whole life. I really don't relate to people who are like, "Yeah, I went this and then that, and then I got a master's." And I always was intimidated by smart people.
Mhm.
And that's because since I've been young, I was always in remedial classes. So if you don't know what remedial classes are, basically you had to be tested to get into the next grade because you were like borderline not ready for the next grade,
Yeah.
right? So I remember taking them to go to middle school. I remember them taking them to go to high school, and I took them to get into college too. I have this like underdog mentality because I always felt like people were just smarter than me. And then
Mhm.
when I went to college, I was on academic probation from like Q1. I just didn't know how to do school. I didn't have the skills of studying. I didn't have like all these skills.
Yeah.
I got by and I got into four-year college, but that was because I had friends and I would copy a lot. It took me 10 years to finish school. And I say this often to my audience, and I honestly think it's the 10 years that had so much to do with the success of my business because it's easy to say that it took me 10 years, but it's like when you really think about it, I had to like swallow my pride, right?
Mhm.
And just feel like a failure for year 5 and year 6 and year 7 and year 8. Being able to like hold on to those emotions and making it safe to be fail really helped me in my business. So I've always loved business. So I got a business degree and even getting a job. I feel like everything was always so hard. Like I worked so many temp jobs. I worked in retail for a long time and I had a great career while I was in school, but it was in retail. And in my head, I just thought, oh, no, 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 I have a degree now. I need to work at like one of these big tech companies in the Bay Area because that's where I lived. To get to the big tech jobs, I literally went through so many temp jobs who wouldn't take me. I would work for them for 6 months and they'd be like, "Okay, bye." I got really good at facing rejection, and I think that skill, it helps me every day in my business that, like, it's okay to be rejected. It's okay to for people not to want you. And then finally, I found one job that hired me, and I had really great managers with that job, and then I left it to start my business. Yeah.
I really like that you brought up the whole rejection thing because that's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially when it comes to starting out, having a podcast, building a business, starting a coaching program, whatever it is. So, I want to talk about your rebrand. Like you talked about before, you have a podcast called Latinas Booked Out, but it was previously Follow That Fear. So, talk about why you decided to change.
When I started Follow That Fear, the way I thought about it is I just want a place where I could teach business. But because I didn't properly have a business when I started, the way I thought about it was like, I'm just going to learn from the pros. I'm going to implement and execute, and I'm going to go to my podcast and be like, here's what I learned. So my podcast became this very safe place for me where I could just teach as I go. My podcast, this place where like I'm building this business. I don't know what it's going to turn into, but here's my journey and here's what I'm learning along the way that's working for me. It was 6 to 8 months when I started my podcast where I started offering coaching and I started getting a couple clients asking for coaching around like marketing. Most people wanted to ask me about podcasting because I had a podcast. So I started doing some coaching. That turned into me trying a lot of different things. I created a course called Podcast Marketing Lab. Then I did a group program. That was 2020, I believe. I started in 2019. That year, my podcast really started turning into a business. I started seeing some money coming in. It wasn't a whole bunch, but I was working myself to the bone. So
Mhm.
at the end of that year, I decided to, so how hard I'm working, this needs to stop. I need to do something else. So I started working with a business coach. I really started working on my mindset. And I decided going forward because a lot of people who were wanting to talk to me started transitioning into coaches and they wanted to learn about me coaching. So I just decided I'm going to start helping either coaches or online educators. And I knew that my podcast needed a shift. It couldn't be this diary for me anymore.
Mm,
As much as I loved that experience, as much as I really appreciated my entire following and the people that supported me from the beginning.
mhm.
And I knew that it was time that, like, if I'm really going to make this a business, this podcast has to be supporting my dream clients. That's just it. It has to be
Yeah.
that way. So I decided to change the name. I think even before I decided to change the name, I changed the topics. Doing that gave me such grief. I remember feeling so bad and I was like, I'm disappointing everyone who helped me get to where I am. Because I was like helping product-based businesses, people with no businesses who just wanted one. It was just a big community of people who just loved personal development. And I was like, am I really going to change my whole podcast? In my head, it was like, leave all my followers or all my audience behind. It really didn't turn out that way. It wasn't like that. A lot of my audience still stayed, but it definitely was a grieving process because that was such a
Yeah.
big part of my story. And I'll tell you what, the reason I really changed the name was because I didn't get the trademark. I would have kept the name and just changed the content.
I mean, I love the new name now, like Latinas Booked Out. That's such a boss name. I'm here for it. But while you were sharing your story, there's something that I thought about that you said during Manifiesta, and I wrote it down in my book that you said your brain can be an asshole to you. Whoever's listening, say they're in the similar position. They've been doing their business for a while, but they want to feel like maybe I should pivot, but I don't know if I should. What would be some advice that you would tell them to move forward?
Yeah.
Or not.
First of all, there isn't going to be stars that align that give you the perfect answer. It's literally a decision, and we don't like making decisions. So, this is very
Mhm,
normal human approach to not wanting to make the decision. Whatever you're trying to pivot into or direction you're going, it is just a decision you have to make. And everything going forward is always going to be decisions I have to make. And what I actually get good at is just trusting myself and
mhm,
trusting my intuition and trusting anything my brain comes up with must be a good idea. That's really the journey because there is no like perfect product or perfect program or perfect podcast. All of it is a decision. Just make the decision and you go for it and then give it some time. And if you don't like it, you change it. That's really what I would recommend to anyone in a place in decision. There's literally no right answer.
yeah.
There's only the answer that you decide is right. When you make that decision, your job for the next 6 months or whatever time frame you give it is to convince yourself that it's the right decision.
It's a lot of mindset work.
Yeah, you just have to like, "No, no, no, remember we made this decision.
Mhm.
This is a good decision. I'm trying this out at this date. I could change it." All of it's about building self-trust. There is no right decision.
Yeah, I love that. Just giving yourself the permission to, like you said, make that decision and whatever comes along the way, just embrace it. What's the worst that could happen? You not doing anything. I think that's probably the worst thing.
That is the worst, or everything staying the same.
Yep. I feel like I'm getting coached myself during this conversation, so thank you.
Good.
All right, so you talked about it a little bit earlier that you're a mom, you're a wife, you just had a baby, so congratulations.
Thank you.
What have been some challenges that you faced with your business and being a wife and being a mom and just having another baby? What are some things that you've struggled through?
Parenthood is just really, really hard. And it's something that you just grow an immense amount of patience with.
Hmm.
I think with a business, at least for me, what I've learned that really benefits me and that has been a challenge is not having control of your situations all the time. So, for example, I remember when my business was I was probably fully booked. I had like over 20 clients that I was seeing one on one every week. At that time, we decided to also put my son in preschool slash daycare. And I didn't know this. Apparently, kids get sick every other week for 6 months when they get into preschool or daycare. I did hear this. I was like, oh, okay, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. But when you're actually going through it, I had to cancel calls. I had to move around my schedule. I had to, what it felt like, disappoint my clients. And I remember thinking like, "Oh my god, there's no way my business is gonna sustain this. There's no
Mhm.
way my clients are gonna stay with me. They're gonna be so pissed." Like, our brains will just go wild on how everything is going wrong when things feel out of control. And going through those emotions and learning that I'm like the CEO of my business, and actually, if I just wanted to take time off because I fucking feel like it, that's also allowed too.
Yeah.
Learning how to take a break from social media and from my business and coaching,
Mhm.
that was such a learning lesson. Luckily, by the time I was in maternity leave, I think I had already understood what that felt like, that I really enjoyed my maternity leave. But I know in the beginning of the year with my pregnancy, like, I really had to learn that money in my business, I have control to turn that off and on.
Mhm.
It's okay to turn it off sometimes. I don't need to be constantly making money all the time in my business. If someone's listening to this and they don't have a business, but they're working on creating their business or whatever that looks like, there are times where you're going to have to take a break of what you're doing. And I know there is fear. Everyone's going to forget about me. Everyone's not going to be there. They're going to stop listening to my show. My stats are going to go down.
I've
My
had all of those fucking thoughts.
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm
so
sure a lot of
true.
people too. Yeah.
It's very valid. I mean, this is what our brains do. Brains are gonna brain.
Yeah.
Like, they it doesn't really matter. Even for, like, people who are great at their mindset, right?
Mhm.
Like, I do a lot of work on my mindset, and my brain's still gonna be an asshole. That's just literally what it does. It protects us
Mhm.
from scary things. So, I think it's important to just have the awareness of what your brain is actually saying, 1. And
Mhm.
then 2, if you could pinpoint the emotion, what does it make you feel? Okay, it makes me feel sad. It makes me feel inadequate. And then what I ask my clients, are you willing to feel that feeling to get to where you want to go? Let's just say that this podcast, eventually you want it to bring in 6 figures just itself, just the podcast, right?
Mhm.
Well, are you willing to feel FOMO on that journey? Because it's 100% going to be a part of the journey. If you feel it and not make it mean something about you or the podcast or whatever, can you find safety in, like, I'm still safe even if I feel this? There's nothing wrong. This is a normal feeling on the journey to where I'm going. And
Mm.
telling yourself that versus everyone's going to forget you, you might as well just quit.
Right. Which a lot of people tend to do. And I'm sure you see that working with clients who've struggled with those mindsets. I want to stay on the mom aspect before we move on because mom guilt is a real fucking thing. I'm sure you felt it. I've definitely felt it. Listeners have felt it. Talk about how they can work through that mom guilt.
What I have learned in building my business, and not only just building my business with a toddler, but now building a business with a newborn, when you feel that guilt, and the guilt can come from a lot of different ways, right? For me, it feels very selfish and self centered. And one thing is for the people who are in the beginning of their journey, I really want you to ask yourself, what kind of mom do you want to be? And what is important for your kids to see in you? At least that's
Mhm.
the way I like to think about it. The reason I even really started going after my, like, goals and what I wanted to do was because I really didn't want to be the mom for him that always told him, you can do anything, like,
Yeah.
you can do anything you set your mind to and la la la, but then not practice it for myself. I wanted to really be the example of, like, okay, I can't tell him this and then not actually do it, right? So, I always say my son was the thing that helped me start my business. He was my inspiration to start my business. Like, even starting your business, it just feels so self-centered and self-interested, and I always ask myself, is this going to make me a better mom in the long term? Does this type of growth help me become not just a better mom, but a better person in their life? If it's going to, then I'm 100% going to pursue this, and I'm willing to feel the guilt. Goes back to kind of what I was talking about. Am I willing to feel the guilt on the way to where I'm going? Because I know that guilt is gonna be that way. I know even a lot of my clients, even with my husband, like, I ask for a lot. I tell him exactly what I need, and I ask him for exactly the time I need, especially when I was starting my business. Now it's like it's just our lifestyle. But in the beginning, it was so uncomfortable for me to say, on weekends, every Saturday is going to be my entire work day, and you're going to take him full time. Because I was for a minute, I was a stay-at-home mom, learning how to do that. Like, I think a lot of women, especially stay-at-home moms, especially working moms, like, I need a whole day and you're going to take the baby by yourself. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that, but it's like, it does feel selfish and it does feel self centered. Are you willing to feel that on the journey? Because in reality, it's not self centered and it's not selfish, because the big picture is like, the more you grow as a person and the more you grow as a mom, the more you go after your goals, if you have them, the better and happier you're going to be. And that's what's most important as a mom. Like, you want your kids to have a happy mom, not like mom that's perfect. That's way more important. So that's kind of how I deal with that. But I'll say with my newborn, I'm dealing with it in a whole different way because he's so young, and I just got a nanny and she actually starts tomorrow. And I'm like so uncomfortable with that. I'll be at the house, like it's not like I'm far, but like if I'm really creating the life where I'm fully supported, where I have nannies and I have personal assistants, and like my life is very supported by people that I pay, right?
Mhm.
That shit feels uncomfortable.
Yes, it
I
does.
like, it's like other level mom guilt. It's like, well, now you're literally doing it by choice. For example, when the nanny starts, I have every intention to like work out all those days and probably to get massages like weekly or bi-weekly, right?
Yep.
Go on a hike so I could think about my business, and it's working. But at this level of my business, hands on keyboard isn't as important as just thinking about my business and where I want it to go. And because those things seem so leisurely, the guilt is like,
Mm. Talk about a mind fuck. Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to ask you, being the coach that you are, why do you think so many of us, when we're building businesses, are afraid of being seen? And how can we work through that?
Here's the thing. As women, women of color, anybody in like any marginalized community, we literally, society profits and also capitalizes on us being small. And what small means is you do exactly what society tells you to do,
Hmm.
and that should be enough.
Yep.
And everybody is at a different like level of that. Like, some kids are told, go to college, you have a good job, you buy a house, you do all these things, right? And then other people are told, you get a job right after high school, and if you could work there for 50 years, then like great. It could look different for everybody, but like that's like ingrained in many, many people. And some folks who really had it hard growing up, they're just told like, you just need to make money, so you figure it out, whatever the case is. And I think why people have a really hard time being visible and expanding, one of the reasons I should say, is because we aren't okay with the versions of ourselves. It's really hard for us to feel exposed because we're really embarrassed of our stories. It's crazy because it's like the things that we're proud of, we could be the most embarrassed about. I remember the first time I told my story about me taking 10 years to finish college. That used to be my shame.
Mm.
I didn't want people to know. When I got my first tech jobs after college, I was getting entry level jobs. My coworkers were like 23 and 21, and I was like 28. And I felt so much shame in that. I think we actually know the power in our stories, but we're so ashamed of sharing it because we
Mm.
either trying to protect people, we're probably trying to protect ourselves, trying to protect our family. And it's just hard, like
Mm.
exposing yourself that way and being that vulnerable.
Mm.
But I will say, every single time that I shared something that I was embarrassed of or ashamed of, or something that was very vulnerable to share, but I desired to share it, every time I did that, it also reached out to people and I would get DM saying, Thank you. Thank you
Yes.
for saying that. I can't even tell you how many people are like, Thank you for talking about how it took you forever to finish college. I'm still in college and it's my 8th year. That's just one piece of my story. But like, I remember holding that over my head with so much shame. And like, the reason it's so uncomfortable is because we are still working on ourselves. And when we're working on ourselves, like, we don't want people to see the nooks and crannies of our very complicated lives and selves. But I will say that that's the healing work of entrepreneurship or going out there, like ambition. Like, It's so healing to tell your story little by little by little by little, and it just makes you braver and braver and braver.
Mm. I'm getting like goosebumps because that's the reason why I started my podcast to share my story. A lot of people who listen, who follow me, they know that I'm a domestic violence survivor. In me sharing what I went through, as uncomfortable as it was, and as scary as it was, and as difficult as it was, it opened up the door to something so life changing that I had no idea. And it was because I was brave enough to share that vulnerability, that pain that I went through. And the amount of people that have DM'd me like across the world, people in London and UK, and just so many people who can resonate with a little bit of who I am. I think there's such a healing power, like you said, in being able to share whatever it is that's your story. And it's because of this podcast that I've been able to do what I'm doing.
100%. And you are one, you are just so brave for sharing your story because that shit is so hard. A lot of vulnerable stuff, it's hard to talk
Mhm.
about, but like that shit is so deep rooted and personal.
Yeah.
And I bet you, for every one person that's reached out to you, there are like 10 more who
Yep.
you gave permission to just be okay and safe in like whether leaving that person or desiring to leave that person or figuring out an exit plan or like whatever that looks like. I bet you there's so many for every one person.
Yes, absolutely. So, for anyone who's listening, I'm getting close to the mic. Please share your story, whatever it is that you've gone through. You don't know who you're going to reach, you don't know who you're going to touch. Just start by starting, start by having that conversation. And I'm not the only one saying it, okay? Kat said it too.
Yeah, go share your story, get uncomfortable.
Get uncomfortable. Yes.
Oh, let me just say one thing, and your job and your work is to find safety in yourself when you tell that story because here's the thing, you might go tell that story and nobody might reach out to you. And I want you to know that that has nothing to do with how special you are, like whatever your brain might be telling you about, like, oh, well, then it's really not a good story or it's not
Yeah.
a special story, blah, blah, blah. Like, go share your story because it heals you and only you. And you don't
Yep.
need shit from nobody.
Period. If I could drop the mic, I would. I love it. So I want to know, what would you say is your superpower?
I would 100% say my superpower is really helping people see that they can do it too. I think my personality and just who I am as a person is I come off just real and they either will find themselves in me or they'll just appreciate that I'm like 100 and they like that and they'll grab onto it and be like, okay, she is kind of like me. She has had a lot of failure. If she could do it, I really can do it too. I just help people believe that it's possible for them too, and I really think that's my superpower overall.
Yeah, for sure. You're definitely the epitome of that, and that's why I gravitated towards you too. So, what would you say is one thing about you that needs a little bit more work?
I got a lot. I got a lot of work to do.
Don't we all?
I'd say my deepest work right now is one is handling well, one, I need to go to therapy. I've never really been to proper therapy, and I've had life coaches and I've had lots of coaches that have helped me through my growth. So I have been working on myself immensely, but I think it's time to really go to therapy because my mom is always a good reminder of that every time I see my mom, I'm like, "Oh shit, yeah, I
Yeah.
really gotta go to therapy though."
Yes. That generational trauma is real.
Yeah. So that is something I need to do. But I
Yeah.
think believing and building this belief that I am incredibly smart and wise and my deep, 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 deep rooted little girl fear is that I'm dumb. I've always held on to that.
Yeah.
So I feel like my work is always going to be reminding myself I'm genius and I'm brilliant and my ideas are smart and they're going to change the world. Talking to myself that way forever is going to be my work.
Yeah. I mean, healing that inner child is probably one of the hardest things that any of us can do. Therapy is definitely a great way. It's a different animal, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But it definitely does help to get to those deep rooted conversations. So now I'm going to start asking you the same questions that I ask every guest that comes on the show. What is one life lesson that has shaped you into the woman that you are today?
A lot of it is the stories that I tell. That's a big one. Ooh, I'll share one. This is toxic relationship that I got out of, which was prior to my husband, but from when I was little. So like we dated from when I was 15 to 23.
Oh, wow.
And it was just bad from the start, but we loved each other deeply.
Yeah.
And I remember telling myself towards the end, the way that helped me think about the relationship, that helped me really let go, was holding deep gratitude for the good that happened in that relationship, even with all the bad things that happened in that relationship was one thing. There was healing to do with that as well. Not saying push that aside, but I think what helped me really walk away from a relationship was telling myself things like, this was a love story. So it makes sense that it's hard to leave.
Mm,
But right now, I need to close that chapter. And I just need to be grateful that I got to experience love and I got to experience being myself with someone. I'm glad I got to experience that because not
mm,
everyone gets to experience just love in general, right?
right.
And then the work for all the toxic shit, you don't put that aside. That's your whole work going forward in life.
Right.
But in terms of helping me walk away, I remember I had to choose myself for the first time, and what was good for me was having gratitude for the good and not from a place of like, "Oh, I should go back with him. I'm so grateful for him, da da da." Not
Mhm,
from that place, but from a place of like, "You know what, Kat? You loved him and you were good to him, and there were times where he was good to you, and you made a lot of bad decisions, but you also got to experience some really amazing pieces of love. For that, I'm proud of you for just letting yourself open up to love because it's such a vulnerable act, especially toxic and abusive relationships. Like vulnerability was taken advantage of. But like in the healing process, at least in my experience, it was so helpful for me to just talk to myself in a way that like I wasn't bad or stupid for being
mm,
in this relationship. I exposed myself to love and I was vulnerable and I'm proud of doing those things because I never want to be a person who is closed off to love.
mm. I'm so glad that you framed it that way because that's definitely been a struggle for me when I think back to not just the abusive one that I was in, but the relationship before that. I was in an 8.5 year long relationship that was toxic as well.
Mhm.
And when you do decide to walk away permanently, you tend to, well, for me personally, just always go to the negative and always talk bad about yourself and be like,
Yeah.
ah, I was such a fuck up, or why did I stay? Why did I deal with this shit? But like you said, like we entered the relationship with coming with love, coming with like
Mhm.
openness and happiness. And that's what you need to be able to look back on when that relationship ends and not just beat yourself up and say all these negative things about yourself. That's really, really an interesting way. I've never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, I think it helped me not get down on myself so much.
Yeah.
Like you said, we're really quick to shit on ourselves. I should have
Yes.
left this time. I should have left that time. Why did I go back to him after this? Like, it's just so easy to shit on ourselves in those relationships. But like, what really helped me heal was me coming to terms with myself and telling myself relationship was bad for 1,000 reasons.
Hmm.
But I'm proud of myself for like, I opened my heart to love and I'm also grateful for the good times that we did have
Yeah.
in those good moments. How grateful I am just to experience that. I got to experience what it felt like to like be stupid with someone and have the good times. Was it a bad relationship? Yes. Have I learned from it? I'm learning now, right?
Yeah.
But the reason you frame it that way, or the reason I framed it that way, is because it was good for me
Yeah.
and my healing. It has nothing to do with them. And then there's, of course, the bad things in the relationship, and that's what we go on to heal. But leaving that relationship was so hard for me. And that's kind of what I did to prepare to leave him when I was 23. The other one
Yeah.
is just about negotiations. That ain't shit. Just be Here's my only advice for that one. When you go to negotiate hard on anything in life, for me, it was my pay. Your brain is going to call you a bitch. It's going to call you greedy. It's going to call you selfish. It's going to want you to be small. And in those moments, this is my advice to you, wear the titles.
Yes. Absolutely. And don't let anyone fuck around with you.
Yeah.
I love that. You're on the Watch Us Thrive podcast. So tell me, what is your definition of thriving?
My definition of thriving is learning how to enjoy your life as it is now. Because the honest truth is, I'm old enough now and experienced enough now to know that every milestone I ever wanted for my life, when I got there, it never made me happy.
Mm. Can you say that one more time? Because I don't think they heard you.
For every milestone you ever had in your life or have in your life, when you get there, that's not what's going to make you happy. So there's no amount of money that's just going to make you happy. There's no partner that's going to make you happy. There's no kids, more of them aren't going to make you happier. Things don't make you happy. Circumstances don't make you happy. Thriving is learning to look at your circumstances and where you are now and be proud of yourself for your growth
Mm.
and be
Yes.
grateful. Thriving for me is like living in gratitude.
For everything, the good, the bad, and the fucking shitty.
Yeah. Living in gratitude and learning how to feel your emotions. I think the most peace I ever had was this year because it was such a big lesson. I had a really bad pregnancy for anyone listening. And I was also trying to build my business. I was scaling it, doing a group program for the first time in a long time. But the safest I ever felt was realizing that one, I'm really sad right now. And then allowing myself to just be sad and like telling myself, okay, we're just going to have to ride this one through, but we're going to get out of it. And like not shitting on myself.
Yeah. Or doing the opposite, like pushing those feelings down and not even facing them, which is something
Yeah.
that I still struggle with to this day. I struggle to like sit in how I feel.
This is like such good advice that I've gotten from my coaches. You cannot out hustle self doubt. We will go to work trying to hustle and work out of our way through emotions. You can't work your way through emotions. You can't like just put it aside and, oh, I'm going to hustle and work on my stuff. It doesn't work that way. That's what I mean by like this year, I was sad and I allowed myself to just be like, it's okay to be sad. Why don't we go watch some Netflix? Why don't we go
Mhm.
do this? Like, I talked to myself so nice in those moments. I was like, that's fucking thriving. Knowing that skill, that's thriving.
Mm. Yes. I'm telling you, I feel like I'm getting coached throughout this entire conversation. That's why I wanted you on, honestly.
Oh, I'm so glad.
No, you're amazing, and I just want to ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up. Go back to little baby Cat. What's one piece of advice you would tell her being the woman that you are today?
The biggest advice to her is just like, just trust yourself. You know what you're doing. Like, let go of what your parents said. Let go of what society said. Let go of what your competition is doing. Let go of all of that and just ask yourself. And that's enough. You don't need nobody else's opinion.
Mm, I love it. So good. All right. Final question. What is an affirmation or a mantra that you practice daily and why?
I don't do a lot of affirmations and mantras, but I do a lot of like thoughts and like journaling from time to time. I'll tell you the thought that I think it made me a lot of money. The reason it did was less business related. So, one thing I told myself a lot, if there was one thought I told myself throughout my biggest year in business, it was everyone wants to work with me. And one thing I really started doing in the beginning of my business or when it really transitioned and kind of what I teach now is when you can learn the skill to hear a sentence and practice believing it. It's pretty incredible what you can do. So when I was telling myself everybody wants to work with me, what I started practicing a lot of is just like, I am accepted everywhere I go. Everyone loves me. I didn't just say it just to say it. I said it and I believed it and I practiced like, what if it was true? How would I feel? What if like my cousins wanted to work with me and my family wanted to work with me? What if my mom wanted to work with me because I'm that good?
Yeah.
Like, how fun would that be? I remember that one helped me a lot in business. And then I think the second one I said it a lot during this podcast episode, but if I were to choose another one, it would be I'm safe to feel this and like I have my own back. Because when you have your own back, when you really have your own back, you don't need nobody
Nobody.
to okay your decisions, to okay your dreams. And even me with a full life with two kids and a husband, family, and I shouldn't say full life, it's complicated life. Like, I don't need my husband to be okay with my decisions. He's my partner, right? So I do need to like let him in on it, but I don't need him to think it's a good idea. I don't need my kids to make me feel good as a mom. I make that decision of what who I want to show up as a mom. I make that decision of who I want to show up as a wife. I make that decision of who I want to be, and I always have my own back. And having that kind of support for yourself is like transformative.
Mm, I couldn't end the episode any better. Kat, thank you so much for being here. Please let my audience know, what are you working on? How can we follow you to get more of your amazing energy and your gems, feel good vibes, all of that?
Thank you. Let's see. I mainly hang out on two places, Instagram and my podcast. So my podcast is Latinas Booked Out, and my Instagram is Cat Del Carmen, CatDelCarmen. And I talk a lot about business. So if you're a coach or a service provider or online educator, I have lots of resources for you on my podcast and everywhere. And then also, if you are one of those things, I have a free training in my link in bio within my Instagram that I highly recommend you watch. It's called How to Sell Out Your Four-Figure Offer.
I love it. And I can't wait to see what the world has in store for you. Keep showing up, keep doing what you're doing, because, like I said in the beginning, you are one of my inspirations. And I'm just so glad that we had this conversation. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I'm so excited to see where you are going and
Thank
headed
you.
with this because this is just the beginning. And I promise you, like, you are opening up so many doors for yourself. You know exactly what you're doing, you know exactly the direction you're going. Whatever your goals are, like, you're headed that way just through every little decision. And
And I got my own back, like you said.
yeah,
Thank
me
you so
too.
much, my love.